Hello everyone, welcome back to Spectator Sports, where we cover sports from a spectator's point of view. I'm your host Sebastian Fonseca. This is episode number 123. And before we get into recapping action across the NFL, let's do a little bit of housekeeping. If you're new to Spectator Sports and you want to help this channel grow, reach a broader audience, please do us a massive favor. We are on the grind to 200 subscribers by the end of the year, and if you can help us meet this goal, it would be greatly appreciated. To help us out, drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. If you want to get clips from today's episode, we got that for you here on YouTube as well as on TikTok. And you want to enjoy Spectator Sports from an audio perspective, we got that for you too. I'll link the Spotify as well as the TikTok and YouTube channel all in the description, and let's get into today's episode. This past week in Philly sports media, it was full of drama surrounding the Philadelphia Eagles. After the Eagles win against the lowly Carolina Panthers last week, A.J. Brown took to the media to basically roast the passing game and how it's been struggling in recent weeks. Many questioned Jalen Hurts and his ability to lead the Eagles offense, and Brandon Graham added fuel to the fire by suggesting that maybe A.J. Brown and Jalen Hurts aren't as close as it's perceived. Well, on the game's first play from scrimmage against the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Eagles set the tone with a 22-yard pass to Grank Calcaterra, basically to say that the Eagles' passing game is also a force to be reckoned with, in addition to Saquon Barkley running the ball. Jalen Hurts found A.J. Brown on a routine basis as the two connected for the first touchdown of the game, and then later found Devontae Smith for a touchdown. AJ and Devontae each had over 100 yards receiving and a touchdown on the afternoon, as any type of beef between AJ and Jalen was squashed as the two reunited for a touchdown celebration, something we've seen them do on a routine basis whenever they link up for a touchdown score. The Steelers made it a point of emphasis, at least on defense, to bottle up Saquon Barkley, as Saquon had kind of a quiet game by his fantastic standards set in 2024. While they loaded up the box and kept Saquon in check, this is again a pick your poison type of offense. You have A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith on the outside. Those two are great at beating man coverage on an individual basis, and they can find holes in the zone by finding it themselves or having Kellen Moore scheme up plays to get them open. Jalen have an easy throw to find them for pivotal first downs and even touchdowns. When there's nothing open, well, Jalen Hurts can scamper down the field time in and time out, and we're seeing shades of 2022 Jalen in this very game against the Pittsburgh Steelers. It was a noticeable difference, especially after the Eagles held on to the ball for the final 10 minutes and 29 seconds in the fourth quarter. The Steelers only had 2 drives in the entire second half, as the Eagles defense pitched a second half shutout, but the Eagles offense had long, methodical drives that resulted in points and especially touchdowns. When the Steelers had a chance to go for it around midfield, they elected to punt the ball deep into Philadelphia territory, and they were down 27-13. And the decision makes sense. You pinned the Eagles deep. You had a great punt that forced them to take the ball at their own 3-yard line. If you get a stop or even a turnover, you're in great shape to get this game back within 1 possession. And unfortunately, that did not go as planned for Mike Tomlin's team. The Eagles had a long, methodical drive with passes and runs and whatever have you. The whole offensive playbook was opened up for a long, methodical drive that bled out every last second of the clock, and unfortunately the Steelers never saw the ball again. The Steelers allowed countless 3rd and longs, and if not it was a 3rd and long, well, they allowed a decent enough play to get into range for the Eagles to have an enticing 4th down opportunity, which they eventually converted. That drive was honestly so demoralizing for the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Steelers defense, at least coming into this game, was really good, and there were times where they had good opportunities to forced turnovers, which they had 2 turnovers, and also got to Jalen Hurts a couple times early in the game. TJ Watt was amazing as usual. He had 2 sacks going up against the great Lane Johnson in the process, but still his efforts weren't enough, and he unfortunately exited the game with an ankle injury. In the second half, the Eagles offense simply mowed down the Steelers defensive line and eventually the entire defense, as we saw them grind out a final possession that bled off all the time off the clock. And like I said, the Steelers never got to see the ball again. Let's talk about this Eagles defense. Now, they did face a Steelers offense without George Pickens, but they still were able to force them off the field countless times. Russell Wilson never seemed to get into the flow of the game. And even though the defense and special teams gift-wrapped the Steelers offense possessions inside Eagles territory, the Steelers came up with only a Boswell field goal as the only points to show for their turnovers forced. While the Eagles defense, when they were in their own territory, the Steelers are poised to tie up this game at 20-all. They were able to recover a Najee Harris fumble and basically turned that into complimentary football, where the Eagles offense went down the field for another long methodical drive to go up 2 possessions, 27-13 in the beginning stages of the fourth quarter. That's really where the game was won and lost, because if the Steelers go down and score, it's a tie ball game, but that 14-point swing completely flips the game on its head. And like I said, the Eagles defense never seemed to let Russell Wilson get into this game. He was really unsettled, and he has to build some trust with these wide receivers that are not named George Pickens. And basically without Pickens, the Eagles defensive back could really key in on Pat Freiermuth, the tight end. And while he did beat them once for a touchdown, it was a pretty quiet day. 3 catches, 22 yards, and they basically were just trying to allow them to get nickeled and dimed down the field. But when it came down into the red zone, they tightened up and really only had 1 touchdown in the second quarter allowed. They pitched a second half shutout and were relatively fresh, and this has been the story of their entire season. The Eagles mow you down, they wear you out on offense, and their defense is fresh to tee off on you, and it's really hard to play an effective football game from there. If the Eagles handle business next week against the Washington Commanders, they would be NFC East division winners for 2024, and basically only have to really worry about the number 1 seed of the NFC playoff picture, as the Lions dropped a game against the Buffalo Bills, and while the Lions do have the tiebreaker right now on conference record, unfortunately for Detroit, they continue to lose players on both sides of the ball. David Montgomery is going to be missing arguably the rest of the season due to a torn MCL, and they did lose another defensive lineman in the process on Sunday. So Detroit continues to get banged up along the way, and again, this is the war of attrition, and luckily for the Eagles, they are healthy for now. They look good, and I think Detroit only can afford to falter one more time, and if they do, they risk losing the 1 seed entirely. For the Steelers, I have huge concerns, as this is their brutal stretch in their schedule. They already lost to the Philadelphia Eagles, and now they have to go on the road to the Baltimore Ravens for what is really the championship game in the AFC North. If they lose that game, they still might have the tiebreaker due to conference record, but the Steelers do play the Kansas City Chiefs, and right now, yes, we don't know about Mahomes' injury status, but even if he misses the next game, I do believe that the Chiefs would have a chance to bring him back on Christmas Day and play the Pittsburgh Steelers. And basically, for the Steelers' sake, they cannot afford to go 0-3 in this stretch, because Baltimore, I think, has a more favorable schedule, and now they're a little bit more rested. They had a recent bye week, and they had an opportunity to rest their starters as they beat up a very bad New York Giants team in MetLife. I think the favorites in the AFC North kind of tilts towards Baltimore favor, but they still have a lot of work to be done. But the Steelers really need to figure out how to get offense generated without George Pickens, because without George in the lineup, and they better hope that he's healthy going into this stretch run, because if not, this could be a terrible collapse for Mike Tomlin's squad that has worked so hard to get into this position where they are today. And if they falter, they could be a early playoff exit come the playoffs. Rewinding back to Thursday Night Football, the LA Rams went up to San Francisco to take on the 49ers, and these two teams have had some big moments between the two. They've went in an NFC Championship game, they've had some barn burner type of matchups with a lot of points, and again, these are some of the best offensive minds in football. Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay. But on Thursday night, we saw a defensive slugfest between these two. 0 touchdowns, 6 field goals on a rainy Thursday night. Coming off of big performances, at least offensively, we saw the 49ers put up 38 points against the struggling Bears, and the LA Rams put up over 40 points against the Bills. We thought we'd get another treat of a classic shootout between these two teams. However, coming into this week, we heard about a lot of receiver comments, particularly with Deebo Samuel, where he's been complaining and showing frustration over lack of targets for the better part of this year. And it's been a disappointing year for Deebo. I mean, despite him posting on X about he's not struggling, he's just not seeing the ball, X came back with community notes talking about his struggles this year. In fact, he leads the 49ers in drops, and they even said that he's struggling this year. And that's fact-checking at its finest right there. And the proof is in the pudding, as many say, that Deebo has had a down year this year. I mean, he had a chance to have the first touchdown this game. He caught one of Brock Purdy's better passes on the night, right on the chest, and unfortunately dropped it, where if he catches that slant pass, he's taking it to the house. But he drops the ball, and he hears boos raining down from Levi Stadium, and it really just summed up the night. Brock Purdy came into this game coming off of that good performance against Chicago, but it's been up and down for Brock Purdy as well, and unfortunately the contract talks are absolutely looming over his head, where he's had a good run with the 49ers, but as of late he's kind of struggled, and an opportunity to have the go-ahead touchdown, if not at least a game-time field goal, he throws a bad interception and attempts to get it to Juwan Jennings, and it's intercepted. Momentum's taken off the board, and San Francisco doesn't have a quality possession ever since, as the Rams run out the clock, get an insurance field goal, and they win the game 12-6. That's probably not even the biggest storyline from this game, as Devondre Campbell walked off the field after a really tumultuous week. Now, the background behind it is that Devondre Campbell was released in this offseason from the Green Bay Packers, and he was looking for a team to play for, signed with the San Francisco 49ers, who obviously need a linebacker alongside Fred Warner, as Dre Greenlaw tore his Achilles in the Super Bowl. He's going to take some time to recover from that injury, and Devondre Campbell, who's been a former first-team All-Pro, was a suitable replacement, at least a stopgap linebacker in Greenlaw's absence. And Dre was ready to go for this game against the LA Rams, but needed a little bit of break. His conditioning isn't the same as the other players, and he had some cramping problems. And unfortunately for the 49ers, when they summoned Devondre Campbell to get onto the field in substitution for Dre Greenlaw, he refused. He walked off the field and hasn't been seen with the 49ers since. He's going to be suspended for the rest of the year. In what seems to be a lost season for the defending NFC champs, the 49ers have so many issues heading into this offseason, especially around Brock Purdy's contract extension talks, getting younger in the draft, figuring out who stays, who goes amongst their veteran core that's been part of 2 Super Bowl runs, a bunch of salary cap problems. Now this Devondre Campbell thing, and this is a really messy year for the 49ers. The Super Bowl hangover is real, and I want to take a deeper dive into this when their season is officially over. It might be coming up soon. But it's been a nightmare year for the 49ers. This is going to be a very pivotal offseason for the 49ers, and this might be their last real shot next year to get back into the Super Bowl hunt. Despite the Falcons ending their losing streak and Kirk Cousins throwing a touchdown pass for the first time in over a month, the Falcons have decided to go in a different direction, with them starting Michael Penix Jr. for the rest of the season over Kirk Cousins. And Kirk has been struggling for the last 5+ games. It's led to a collapse in the middle part of the season after they started off 6-2. They're going to need some help to get back into the NFC South playoff picture, because as of now, the Bucks are a game ahead. They have the easier schedule coming up. It's going to be up to Michael Penix Jr. to save their season and get back into the postseason mix. I do think that this move is a win-win scenario for the Falcons. Now, they've had a bad swing of things, but there's going to be some juice with Michael Penix Jr. out there on the field. There's not a lot of tape on him. They're going to have to reference his days back in college. Honestly, Michael Penix Jr. at this point couldn't be any worse than Kirk Cousins is at this point. We've been consistent here on this platform talking about how Kirk Cousins, from a physical standpoint, hasn't been the same since his Achilles injury. His zip on the ball isn't there due to the poor base, the lack of strength coming back from the ability to drive the football down the field. There's a lot of ducks and flutter balls being thrown from Kirk Cousins. I think at this point, it's best for the Falcons to move on. The time is now to invest in the future. Take a look at Michael Penix. If he does find a way to lead the Falcons into the postseason, I think that's a win for this season after some adjusted expectations. Now the focus is on how this impacts their cap situation. Unfortunately, the Falcons will still be on the hook significantly for Kirk Cousins' remaining contract, but if they do cut him post June 1st, it does save some of the cap for next year, and they can push it back to 2026 and then continue to invest around Michael Penix Jr. Now, a lot remains to be seen if Kirk Cousins can respond, if he's given an opportunity with a different team, but I think if he adjusts his expectations and looks to mentor maybe a rookie or a young developmental QB, he could be a bridge quarterback for the remaining years of his career, however long it may be. But clearly he's going to need some more time to rehab this. He can have a full off season to rehab and find a different team with a different situation to prolong his career. It's another nationally televised game for the Seattle Seahawks, and once again they fall flat on their face. The Green Bay Packers come into Lumen Field and beat the brakes off the Seahawks. We've seen this so many times against the elite football teams. The Seattle Seahawks have faltered. From the jump, despite winning the coin toss, Green Bay said, we're taking the ball and we're going to push the ball down the field. We're going to be physical with Josh Jacobs. And it had an opening drive touchdown, and it really showed that the physicality for the Green Bay Packers is going to be their calling card come postseason time. For Seattle, they lost Geno Smith along the way. He's going to be questionable for the remainder of the season. If he's able to go, that'll be a big boost, but still he had a poor turnover in the red zone that could have gotten Seattle back into this game. We've seen them now that they just don't seem to have it against these elite football teams, and I wasn't expecting them to be an elite contender amongst the NFC playoff teams, but I do think that they had some things on paper to be better than some of these other teams, and they could have a chance to maybe win a postseason game. But they definitely look soft against the Green Bay Packers on Sunday night. They still have some opportunities to still win this NFC West, but right now they don't have the tiebreaker, and their schedule next week doesn't get any easier with Minnesota coming into Seattle. And if they're playing like they have in the past, I think Minnesota should be beating Seattle quite comfortably, and that might lock up the division for the LA Rams sooner rather than later. For the Green Bay Packers, they can show that they're a championship contender. It's just unfortunate that this year they're playing in the league's hardest division. In any other division in the NFC other than the NFC East, they would be leading that division. But unfortunately this year, the Detroit Lions have been playing great at 12-2, and the Minnesota Vikings are also 12-2, playing great. Their 4 losses have come to 2 against the Detroit Lions, 1 against the Minnesota Vikings, and 1 against the Philadelphia Eagles. All 3 have a 12-2 record. So it's a very tough schedule, but 10-4 considering is very good. They're great against anybody else in the league. I've been saying this consistently, that I think that if they were to beat their first round matchup in between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers or the LA Rams, I think they're very capable of doing so. And then if they have a chance to go to Detroit or Minnesota or even Philadelphia, they have an absolute chance to come out there victorious, and they're a sneaky team. The way the playoff picture is looking like, it's a 4-team race with the 3 teams that are playing really good in the NFC North and the Eagles. But with Josh Jacobs there being that kind of counterbalance to keep Jordan Love in check, because we know he's very aggressive, and that's a very good mentality because it's high risk, high reward, but you do get snake bitten a couple times when he puts the ball in bad situations. So if you limit the damage with his sometimes questionable decision making, and you give the rock to Josh Jacobs like we saw on Sunday night, this team for Green Bay is elite. And it's just a matter of how the playoff picture really lines up and how they have the matchups, because I think they're a dark horse contender in this postseason. It seems that Josh Allen is going to be closing in on this year's MVP award, as he had another signature win as the Bills went into Detroit to beat the Detroit Lions 48-42. Now, looking at the final score, it looks like a close nip and tuck kind of ball game, but to be honest, the Bills offense ran over the Detroit defense, and While I do like this victory for the Bills, the defense still gave up 40 plus points, and this is back-to-back weeks. And I'm not really a fan of that because the AFC is full of high-powered offenses, and it could take one offense that gets really hot to come into Buffalo and somehow eliminate the Bills. An affair that we think that the Bills should be favored in. But in this game, Bills out-physicaled the Detroit Lions, and they did it on both sides of the ball. I thought their pass rush got home on Jared Goff. They did give up a lot of points on their own side, but they did the job when they needed to. The ground game seems to really be clicking with James Cook. We haven't really talked about that enough, but he's been the back that I think the Bills have needed for the while now, because after Josh Allen took over as the Bills starting quarterback, they've had some decent spells with running backs, but they haven't really had a consistent bell cow. But I think James Cook is really suited for the job. Josh Allen, this win continues to build his MVP case as he's gaining some distance after Saquon had a kind of a quiet couple of weeks. Now, there's still about 3 weeks left in the year, and I think really the only pathway for Saquon to get the MVP award is to break the all-time season record. Talking about Detroit, injuries continue to pile up for this Lions team. Unfortunately, they lost 3 major pieces of this team. David Montgomery is going to likely miss the rest of the season with a torn MCL. You have Carlton Davis, their starting cornerback. He's going to be missing time with a broken jaw. And unfortunately, they also lost Aleem McNeil, their defensive tackle. Defensively, these injuries are significantly starting to pile up. They have had injuries to their defensive line with Aiden Hutchinson and now McNeil. They've lost Rodriguez, the linebacker, and Alex Anzalone to significant time with injuries. Anzalone will be back at some point, but still he's missed significant time this season. And in the secondary, Brian Branch, although he's been appearing in games, he's definitely dinged up with some type of upper leg injury, and he's not 100%. And we understand that this is the war of attrition. Everybody's banged up this time of year. But the Lions have over 20 players on IR, and this is an alarming and accumulating amount of players because in terms of their NFC rivals, as in the Minnesota Vikings and Philadelphia Eagles combined, they have fewer than the amount of players that the Detroit Lions have on injured reserve. I don't think that Dan Campbell, though, is going to let this team fold like a lawn chair. I think they'll be trying to ride this wave as long as they can. Jahmyr Gibbs will be leading the Detroit backfield for much of the rest of the season with Sonic and Knuckles. It was mostly Knuckles leading the charge, but Jahmyr Gibbs is a very capable back, and he's been getting the lion's share of the carries as of late as well. Now, they definitely lose a little bit of power and punch with David Montgomery out, but Jahmyr Gibbs is one of the fastest backs in the league, so I think they'll be fine behind that powerhouse offensive line. On the broader scheme of things, I do think that Detroit's injuries are significant, and it does worry me because there are teams out there in the NFC playoff picture that could pose some trouble, and they could come into Ford Field and upset the Detroit Lions in the postseason. Is it possible that LeBron James could be finally on the decline? Now, he's had a historic career. He's had a career filled with longevity. He has pretty much every record from an individual standpoint in NBA history, and he's a GOAT candidate, absolutely. But in this recent slide where the Lakers have gone 3-7, we're seeing that LeBron may be finally succumbing to father time. LeBron's recent play has dropped off, where he went through a 6-game stretch in particular where he averaged 42% and had a streak of missing 19 consecutive three-pointers, including an eye-popping no-show against the Minnesota Timberwolves where he went just 4 out of 16. Thankfully, was able to keep his 10-point-plus game streak alive. Still got blown out by the Minnesota Timberwolves. And the following game against the Miami Heat was actually better performance from him individually, but the Lakers as a whole suffered a 41-point blowout, one of the worst losses in LeBron's career. The troubling thing is that LeBron actually has been off not just for this year, but maybe even a couple of years in the past. I mean, look at the postseasons where since the Lakers have won the title, you actually haven't seen a lot of production out of LeBron, and it really takes the Lakers to be pushed to the brink of elimination for him to churn back the clock and channel maybe peak prime LeBron James. And of course, this guy is in his late 30s. He's turning 40 at the end of this month. He's on borrowed time, let's just be honest, but maybe it's finally time that LeBron is seeing the end of his career. This year's Lakers actually have been better with LeBron off the court, which is astounding considering his GOATed-like status. Looking at the defensive side, I mean, we've known LeBron hasn't been great defensively. That's just a part of age. But again, they've been much better with him off the court than on the court. The other thing where we're seeing before, he's been able to accumulate stats. That's one of his biggest strengths of his career. Even despite maybe having kind of a down year in terms of points per game output, I think the biggest attributing factor to that is just his lack of ability to drive to the basket. He's just not being aggressive anymore. Maybe it's a lack of burst, because the drives to the basket are just not happening. We're seeing him settle for jump shots, and that's really the first sign that a player whose bread and butter is getting to the paint, getting to the cup, is just not at the same capacity where he once was. This year alone, LeBron actually averages a career low in free throw attempts a game, 4.5, only is shooting 28% at the rim. And the elevation is certainly lacking. There was a couple times where LeBron probably in his prime could have slammed the ball home for an emphatic dunk, but instead takes a little bit of a bunny hop and guides the ball into the hoop for a kind of a softer slam. Of course, we've been talking about age. He's almost 40. It's only a matter of time till the body breaks down. It's just not the same as what it used to be. He does also seem a little bit disengaged, and that's just a tall-telling sign that the Lakers are in trouble. It's been a decent start, but the recent few games have kind of destroyed that good start. And they've went from a top 4 or 5 seed in the West to now being on the brink of missing the playoffs entirely. They're in the thick of the play-in tournament. That's kind of the team that they have been post-bubble championship in 2020. Maybe he's disengaged, maybe he's in a slump, but who's to say that after going through the trials and tribulations of another season, is it finally say that LeBron's on the decline and maybe by season's end he will finally hang it up and retire. Zion Williamson is out again, and since early November, he's been missing time due to another hamstring injury. Last year, he teased us with this amazing season where he played the most amount of games in his career, finally breaking the 70-game threshold. But then in the play-in tournament against the LA Lakers, his hamstring gets aggravated and we don't see him for the rest of the season. He came into this offseason looking slimmer. He's been the lightest he's ever been since entering the NBA. We've heard about the new diet. We heard about the improved training program, all this stuff. But where are the results? Because in a very troubling video that surfaced on the internet, where Zion is getting a tattoo, and he's not looking like an NBA athlete. I mean, he looks overweight, out of shape. And if you're looking at how Zion Williamson looks like a guy who's 24, 25 at this point, and LeBron James, who is about to turn 40 later this month, it is a night and day on who really cares about their body and who really cares about the game of basketball. And I'm not asking Zion Williamson to invest $1 million into his body and be LeBron James kind of shape and physique, but I mean, look at yourself right now. I mean, where is the care? Where is the passion? You're a pro athlete and you're a player that uses his explosivity and lands on those joints constantly. And that's been the kind of the issue in the early part of his career, foot and knee injuries. And for a guy that has high impacts after coming down hard with those dunks and block shots, it's a leaping, jumping league in the NBA. And for him to continuously be out of shape, be frequently injured, and that's another example of how guys with all the God-given talent are continuing to waste it on food and just not coming prepared to be ready to go come the regular season. So that's it for this episode of Spectator Sports. Shout out to Joy for editing this podcast. And remember, for everybody new to Spectator Sports and you want to help this channel grow, please do us a massive favor as we are on the grind to 200 subscribers by the end of 2024. Please do us a massive favor. Drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. If you want to get clips from today's episode, we got that for you here on YouTube as well as on TikTok. And you want to enjoy Spectator Sports from an audio perspective, we got that for you too on Spotify. I'll link the TikTok and YouTube channel in the description. And thanks everybody, take care and have a good week.